Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Lost on Criterion. I'm John Patrick Owatari Dorgan, and with me, as always, is a man with no name.
The Adam Glass.
That's a name.
Right. Also with us this week, once again, is our good friend Donovan Hill, joining us on more Kurosawa, because he's a Kurosawa expert, at least legally speaking, in that he knows more than Pat and I.
You've already used that joke.
It's not a joke, it's just...
The legally speaking part?
Yeah.
The joke that I know more than the rest of you about Kurosawa.
No, he's just...
Listen,
used
guys,
that exact statement before.
I'm sorry if I've used that exact statement.
But I think you weren't talking about Donovan.
Here in the Criterion Collection, we don't necessarily put a lot of effort into recycling gags, or intros for that matter, so...
No, although I don't think I've ever said the same thing twice yet.
Alright, well, you one-up me if that's true. Anyway, this is Mifune again. 1962, Akira Kurosawa, Sanjuro this week. The sequel to Yojimbo.
I am sort of surprised that it was so swiftly released.
Oh yeah, it was. Yojimbo was so popular, and I guess Sanjuro was already in the plot, or in the pipe. It was supposed to be unrelated. It was just another adaptation, an adaptation of an unrelated short story. But Yojimbo was so popular that he reformatted it into another vehicle for the character, and there we have it, Sanjuro.
Yay!
And that's where that's where Christmas comes from.
Didn't get remade nearly as often,
or ever, I think. Or it was it?
But probably because Fistful of Dollars got sued, which we mentioned last time,
and everybody was like, "Ah, crap."
Also, Sanjuro's somewhat more not. A somewhat more complex and situational to Japan story, somewhat harder to adapt than Rogue Mercenary plays two gangs off each other for his own benefit. Sanjuro is a much more specific to Japan of that era or that time period.
I think it could have worked.
It could. I just think it would require a lot more work because
it would require more adaptation.
Right.
Whereas Fistful of Dollars was like it was just
takes 10 seconds.
Straight stolen.
Right.
I mean, it was
right. Like let's just shoot it. Let's just reshoot it and use this awesome spaghetti western set we have.
Yeah, and this great soundtrack.
Thank you, Adam.
It's somewhat of an improvement over the Yojimbo soundtrack, which was notoriously horrible trumpet blaring and like weird saxophone.
Yeah, we didn't mention that. The music in that one
the
was
Yojimbo
like this
soundtrack
weird
is one of the weirdest,
thing.
like most stressful to the ear.
That is
like
yes, it is.
Just what were they doing?
Oh, can you make that stop? Yeah.
But yeah,
Sanjuro less stressful saxophone music than Yojimbo. Yes. It's definitely an improvement the sequel has. Except the soundtrack was not a like torture jazz band going totally ape at all times.
It sounded like a Moog at some points too. There was very clearly synthesized.
Yeah, it's the Yojimbo soundtrack is probably its own podcast somewhere. Like. But not, thankfully not this one.
Thankfully not.
A podcast called What the Shitting Fuck is going on here, but that's not the Criterion.
Why are my ears bleeding?
A podcast called I Don't Want to Listen to Saxophone That Isn't Being Played from the Correct End. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about slightly less famous companion piece to Yojimbo, despite not as widely known, despite the fact that it's basically impossible to purchase a copy of Yojimbo without getting a copy of Sanjuro in a Criterion double pack.
I think you might be right there.
It's
but yes, the sequel where he gets not one sidekick but 10.
Yes,
and it's great. I love his.
This is a much lighter movie than the last one. Despite
what we'll get to in a minute.
The final scene.
Despite the horrific blood in the final scene.
Yes. This is
spoiler alert.
Despite a body count that is somewhere in the neighborhood of quintuple the Yojimbo body count. A movie that is, on the whole, considerably more lighthearted, in part because it transfers the bumbling incompetence from the plot central to two competing gangs to the sidekick flotilla that Yojimbo is saddled, or that Sanjuro is saddled with. Also, infamously, where we get what passes for his name is in Sanjuro and not the original film.
Well, yeah, and then changes to be, he
does the same thing.
30-ish. Yeah, he does the same thing, and it changes to be 30-ish Camellia. Me and my wife were talking about his name. I was like, they translate his name, and she's like, but that's just a name. The thing is like Sanjuro, like people do like.
Yeah. I mean, it can be a literal name.
Is just also a name. It's the fact that he's staring out the window and being an obvious jerk. That was a translator's choice to be like, please note that this is not his name. And it's just a really interesting thing that happens. That like, because when I was talking to her about like, what does it mean? Does it mean 30? Because I knew it didn't mean 30-year-old. She was like, it doesn't mean anything. Guys who have the last name, like you have names with Juro in them. And I'm like, yes, I know, but like they say it has a meaning. What does it mean?
She's like, the meaning is he's a dick. That's the meaning.
Yeah. And that's basically what it finally came down to. Is like, yes, it's just, we need to point out that he's a jerk. And it's much more obvious to a Japanese speaker than it is to an English speaker.
Despite the fact that they distinctly show him looking out the window to a field.
Well, right, but if you don't understand that that's
what he's looking at,
what he's looking at, which is not directly obvious, you could get into a thing where you're like, oh, well, that's just his name.
So we get his name, which is 30-something, roughly translates to 30-something, like poppy field or something. He looks out the window.
Well, this time, 30-something-year-old, was it Camellia, right?
Yeah, some kind of flower field or like some.
It's a popular flower.
Yes,
in Japan.
there is. He looks out into
because
some.
It's the flowers that the house next door is named for. Because there's so many of them. But the last time it was like mulberry bush or something.
Yeah, it was mulberry. He names himself after local fauna that he sees, or flora that he sees out the window.
I really almost wish there was a third movie where he names himself after like something really awful.
He is.
Like he looks out the window and names himself like 30-year-old
outhouse.
Like
I was gonna say, he looks outside and goes, "God damn it, my name is 30-something mud puddle." Or like,
exactly.
The terrain has favored his particular self-naming convention, and pretty much every time he's been out there. But
eventually, that's going to bite him in the butt.
Sooner or later, he's going to get screwed on that. Let's see. So this film opens considerably less dramatically. Also, as the prior film.
I don't even remember.
There is a total absence of dogs carrying human hands to set the tone for this film.
How does this one? Oh, they're just talking in the room.
Yeah,
right.
It meets with the 9 guys talking.
Yeah, we are introduced to the sidekick flotilla considerably way before we're introduced to him.
Dumbass 1 through 9.
Right. And again, kind of continuing the deconstruction of the samurai myth. Here it is. Sort of less about himself than look at all of these bumbling moron samurai who are totally inept at everything and require.
Yeah, I can't believe these people can even put food.
How the hell did we decide these guys were the head of the caste system? Look at how completely inept they are at basic everything. And also, there's the issue of the inter-clan plot, which is what they're sort of broiled up in. Which is again another sort of was a common theme in a lot of the Shambara picks of this time.
It's still a common.
Yeah, it's still a common.
Any Japanese period piece is interclan
politicking.
Yeah,
and double crossing, which is again in and of itself a deconstruction of the noble, virtuous samurai myth, because in fact they were a bunch of power hungry, treacherous, sneaky. Double-crossing who thought nothing of betraying and so on. They're literally their own, let alone any kind of external rival from outside the clan. These guys couldn't even bother to be loyal to themselves, let alone the people they were charged with protecting or whatever else. So that is part and parcel of the samurai myth deconstruction, that these that this period of film, and in particular Kurosawa sort of kicks it off, plays into. But largely it is done less sort of through that, which, as you mentioned, Pat, is kind of becomes, if it wasn't already, a fairly popular plot device or plot underpinning.
At this point, it's part and parcel of.
But it's less.
The
samurai deconstruction is largely provided by the gaggle of just flabbergastingly incompetent sidekicks who have their hearts in the right place and are sort of portrayed as noble.
Actually, for the first time, like, because the previous movie, our bumbling idiots are bad guys.
Right here,
this time our bumbling idiots are
the good guys, and and
we're supposed to read them as, wow, these guys are nice people, but man, are they dumb.
Right. There's probably even something to be said about the only virtuous samurai here are ones who are haplessly inept, totally ineffectual, and would easily be outmaneuvered and killed off by all of these other, but for the intervention of a guy who is as morally bankrupt as their antagonists, they would have all died.
Yes.
But, so there's probably some sort of ethical statement contained in, but for the intervention of, notoriously unethical main character, anybody with any shred of decency or honor would have been outmaneuvered and then killed off by the rest of these guys, which is kind of the central plot of the film, is that he's sort of saddled with these guys who are involved in a interclan dispute in which they have been marginalized for being, in part, paying more than lip service to their honor code.
Yes.
And as a result, they are targeted for assassination, and a hapless bodyguard gets embroiled in their conflict, much to his continuous grumbling and stubbled chin rubbing.
Right. But at the same time, he just
keeps
on doing it.
And just proceeds to grumble about having to help them while he's creating a body count that's few other films.
Really pretty phenomenal,
like, Kill Bill has to work pretty hard to get as many corpses in a short time frame as this one does.
Well, and the weird thing about it is like with something like Kill Bill, like, we're purposely set up in a situation where, like, okay, we are going to maximize body count.
Right.
Here, it's like, this is just his afternoon.
Yes. Somewhat.
Like, this is Sanjuro's, like,
this is just what happens.
This is how he hangs out.
Grumbles, rubs his stubble, business. And then butchers everybody. On Tuesday. It's Tuesday, so that's the day for it.
Like, he wipes out an army of guys in the building by himself.
That scene we'll get to later, but I want to touch on the fact that in some ways, sort of how Yojimbo opens with the dog in the hand scene is kind of like a very dark, almost, that's the kind of scene that you would normally now see in a much darker film, or even a different genre. That's a horror movie opening in some respects.
Yeah, it is.
The scene wherein he kills fucking everyone, itself has similar, like, how he bars the doors so they can't get out, and he locks them in there with himself, and there's the way that scene is very ominously set up. Again, this character is renowned for being, he's sort of lovable despite the fact that he does, like, almost unspeakably horrific acts of violence. But then he grumbles about it and rubs his chin afterwards, and you're like, oh, you.
Well, and then that's the weird thing. I think I mentioned this before we started, is that, especially in this one, he has this sort of, like, almost sounds like the perpetrator of domestic violence. He's like, look what you made me do. You made me kill all of these people. They're like the incompetent idiots. It's like, what a weird phrase. Like, surely there was some other method of escape, of getting out of this without murdering
everyone.
55 people.
So,
yeah.
Well,
honestly, you probably could have murdered 2 or 3.
Yeah, this movie has sort of an interesting, in that there's this big involved political conspiracy and everything. And in the end, they just lock everyone in a room with this guy and he kills them all, and that's how they solve the problem.
Right. Like,
they literally just lock the rest of the fucking clan in a room with this bodyguard, and he butchers them like animals. And that's the film's haphazard resolution is, well, clearly these guys would never be able to outmaneuver or do anything himself, so Sanjuro has to just lock everybody in a room and cut them all to pieces. Which is, in many ways, sort of a much grimmer ending than even Yojimbo had. Where it's sort of justified because he's getting revenge on these, all these guys that tortured him and tried to kill him, and the one guy has a gun, so there's the element of, the odds are stacked against him. And despite the odds being numerically stacked against him, that scene ends with people desperately throwing their weapons away and scrambling to get out and being butchered all the same, as opposed to, people are actively trying to kill him in the final fight, and therefore his killing them is in some way justified by, the fact that it is a mutual combat.
Well, this movie also definitely has a theme of that being inescapable for him.
Right, that he is perpetually going to be drawn into this world of violence because it's kind of his only methodology for solving issues. That's
why the Chamberlain's wife exists as a character in this, and as one of the only competent females in any of the movies we've watched that take place in this era. And she's repeatedly telling him, "No,
please stop killing people.
Please stop killing people. It's not solving anything." And he starts to agree to a point, especially in the very end. He's looking forward to being the sheathed sword,
right?
And then he gets sucked into that last little fight, and is very mad about it.
Yeah, that's something that is seemingly almost out of character for him, is the fact that he, unlike Yojimbo, where he never, to the extent he expresses regret about killing, he expresses regret about the bother of it, like when he's helping people. In this one, he expresses legitimate frustration that he is forced into this massacre. He is, compelled to this massacre by circumstance, and that this is not something he would have wanted to do.
Yeah, which is one problem I have. A lot of people call this a prequel to Yojimbo, and I mean, obviously that's not established in story at all where it takes place. But I think if anything, there's character development
post Yojimbo.
Right? I would tend to agree.
That
his character in Yojimbo is not the person that he ends Sanjuro as. I've always thought it was a sequel because of that, because it is.
Yeah.
He is sort of actively attempting to remove himself from that life, which is definitely not where he's at in Yojimbo, where he's actively enrolling himself in it for profit.
Yeah, and randomly at will.
And then and throwing a stick in the air to get there. So I have never, while they are technically not sequential, and indeed there is no established timeline. They just both have the same character. To the extent that there is a character progression, it's definitely, I think, Sanjuro comes second.
Yeah.
Because his character in Yojimbo is totally inconsistent ideologically and psychologically with where he's at the end of Sanjuro. So
by the end of Sanjuro, he's matured a little bit. He's still a murderer, but he's not happy about his role as murderer.
He is not wild about where he's at, which is a definitive difference between the two, I think. There's no pining for pacifism after he slices that dude open and lets him bleed out in the dirt after throwing a knife into his arm.
That is true.
Shakespearean death scene or no, there's no remorse. Speaking of that guy, he shows up again, and this film ends not just with the massacre, but with I feel like has to be one of the earliest depictions of the Japanese film martial arts trope of a guy geysering blood like a pressure hose.
That really got me off guard.
And again, is one of those things where you're like, this is fucking insane that in 1962 Kurosawa was getting away with this.
Apparently that was accidental. It was supposed to bleed. It was supposed to sort of ooze. There was a problem with a coupling in the tube. And hence the pressure was geyser. So much greater than they had meant it to. But they kept filming, and the actor, I have read that it was powerful enough that he had to adjust his footing to not get knocked over by the geyser of fake blood coming out of his neck. But he stayed in character and kept at it, so they kept the take.
The cut. And then that became
That's
a
great.
cinematic trope forever.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a great thing to know.
Which is
It was a
funny.
mistake.
That is hilarious that
It
that was an
caught me
accident
so
that
off guard.
became such a, extremely, probably at the time, very startling scene of violence that then...
Well, it is.
Oh, yeah, it's completely startling.
It's still
As a-
startling now.
Yeah,
It is still, I think, in a way that...
It's not startling in other movies that use it, but in
No.
this movie, I was like, what? I was like, okay, I missed something. I need to go back. I watched it like 3 or 4 times to try and figure out, I was like, he just, out of nowhere, that stab is just blood spray inducing.
Yeah.
It's
Like,
it's
what did I
definitely
miss?
it is a seemingly extremely anachronistic part of that film because you don't really see that as a film trope until the really sort of exploitation era 70s Shambara films. So it's very, very, very sort of out of character for what are considered to be more steady, more staid, more reserved, more introspective Kurosawa films to end with something that sort of pulpy and egregious is definitely, it's why that scene remains really shocking even now, because it is, even knowing that that is a film trope, you don't expect to see it in a Kurosawa film.
Well, even without the accident, even without it being accidentally that egregious,
You're surprised
I think it was still
surprised he
it was
kept
still
it.
meant to be. It was still meant to be shocking, I think.
Right.
Because the end of Yojimbo, we have him dying in a pool of blood, but we didn't see him bleed out. There's all of this violence. We sometimes see the results of the violence, blood-wise, gore-wise, but we never necessarily see it so dramatically as this.
As it happens.
All these people getting cut, they're not getting cut and then bleeding. There's never any knife on the blade or blood on the blade. Even when we cut off arms, they don't spurt.
Well, and that's one of the funny things. It always amuses me. One of the plot things that happens in this movie, plot points, is
well, he does
there's still blood on his blade, and I'm like, actually, there wasn't when he put it away.
I know he always,
Thinking it was
which is
dirt-
funny
it was
because
bright
he always
clean.
does the. There is literally a name for it, and I don't remember what it is. There is a name for the ceremonial shake-off that every film often depicts, where they sort of shake the blood off the blade before sheathing it, which is a practical thing, because otherwise you get blood in your sheath, which is wood, and it can rot your sheath from the inside with the liquid, and it can rust the blade, and there are a ton of practical reasons why you do it. So there is literally a wrist motion that they apparently teach, which is the shake the blood off your blade before you put it away. Sometimes also depicted as them very dramatically wiping it on their kimono sleeve, pinching their kimono sleeve and then dragging it through, or another popular later incarnation of that is the guy that perpetually has a couple pieces of rice paper to wipe his blade down with in a dramatic fashion before he puts it away, and then the camera focuses on the bloody rice paper as they blow away in the wind.
Right.
So it's a trope that takes several incarnations, based off of the, usually it's just the blade shake, which I always thought was that. Yeah, but there's still gonna be some. If you're gonna do it, you kind of have to wipe it on something to actually get all of it off.
Maybe they oiled the blade first, so that just shaking it would
dispenses.
get rid of
Yeah. But there's always that I think is part and parcel of, well, why wouldn't he keep it out, and why, because, in a lot of the swords are such a, they only come out long enough to do the job, is kind of a repeated, they are always immediately put away as soon as he's, even before everyone has actually died, he's already put his sword away, which is a thing, again, you see a lot in these films where it's a dramatic, it is both an indication that he's such a badass, he knows that the threat to him is over.
Already dead.
Yeah, he knows that even
everybody's
though these guys are still alive, all threats are neutralized. As well as part of the whole sword mythology of, it makes the action sequences that much more startling and fast paced when all of a sudden there are swords out. The the situation changes in the drop of a hat, which makes the quick draw action sequences have more punch. Is all of a sudden now there's live blades on the screen, and then it signals that just as soon as it came, it helps build up his martial prowess. That no sooner has the threat arrived than he has dispensed with it and returned to his arms folded in kimono, rubbing stubbled jaw normalcy. Which, again, makes the protracted murder scene all the more jarring.
Yeah, it makes it really
even
weird,
internally
like,
jarring because of how long it goes on for and how much bloodletting is done during it. Even compared to other action sequences that, for example, in Yojimbo, there's no, even the big final showdown scene is over in 2 seconds.
Well, yeah, in Yojimbo, our largest scene of violence, as we mentioned, was against a house.
Is a fuck bamboo storage.
Man versus house.
It's man versus roof bamboo storage is really where the grudge of Yojimbo is at there. Which, again, makes the... I guess, do you guys want to sort of lead up to that scene? Let's set the stage for it in some respects. Spoilers.
I mean, we've already talked about it, so
it's fine.
There's a scene at the end of this film.
We're allowed to jump around.
The scene at the end of this film, which is the not quite the climax, because the climax is the aforementioned arterial blood spurt duel.
Yes.
Right.
Which isn't much of a duel, so much as it is a return to form after the big launch.
Our blades are out for
half a second.
Bare minimum.
It's a single stroke fight.
Yeah, it is a Iaito fight is the technique, which is the draw, cut, and return to sheath in one move, which is which again, in and of itself became a infamous, film trope of long, protracted stare down, half a second of movement, and then one guy falls over dead while the other guy has already put his sword away.
Yes.
In this scene, there is a Yojimbo, by some sort of subterfuge, I can't remember what it is exactly, he somehow tricks essentially the entire enemy clan, but for bumbling flotilla of sidekicks, into a courtyard, or some fenced-in area. There is some walled-off, interior courtyard, and he's lured them there under some pretense, because he's playing at being an ally. And once he gets them there, he bars all the doors, draws his sword, and proceeds to butcher the entire lot of them over the course of 6 or 7 minutes. And it starts out with a fight where once they've realized they've been had, they all draw swords and come after him. And after the first 25 or so are killed, the rest of them realize that they are not capable
we need to get out of here.
They are not capable of, that this guy is not going to be, they are not in his league, no matter how many of them there are, and that they need to get out of here. At which point, they actively begin running away from him, throwing their weapons away, scrabbling at the doors, trying to climb the walls, just completely disengaging from battle and fleeing and screaming in cowardice, which again, plays into the social critique of, so much for the valiant samurai that prefers honest death in battle to, a coward's death. And a coward's death is what at least half of them get, but also so much for the noble samurai, because Yojimbo is butchering unarmed, screaming men who are clearly ceased being a actual threat to him, if they ever could have been construed as one in the first place. And they are, butchered like screaming animals at length, which again is a little strong, for a film of this time period, and again is sort of, in many ways, almost a horror film, in the sort of relentless, merciless way in which he carries out, his. Oh yeah, his
he's a horror monster in that.
Yeah, he's the way that he lures them in and locks the doors. There's a lot of almost, horror movie methodology or however you want to say it, at play here.
Yes, he ignores your screams.
Yeah, he's the way that the ominous way in which that scene is set up sort of plays to what's going to happen, which is not a fight but a slaughter. And it just goes on, which may have been intentional to emphasize the inhumanity of it well.
I think it definitely was.
Yeah, so it's again, that combined with the forthcoming arterial spray scene is, this film has some things that are extremely almost, un-Kurosawa-esque. Or things that you're surprised to see Kurosawa tackling with such, extended gusto.
Yeah, it was
which is more
enthusiasm.
In many ways, I think, surprising because it's in this one, the lighthearted comical romp of incompetence, than it is in the considerably, darker, grimmer Yojimbo, which is, has a considerably grimmer plot line and wherein the character is portrayed a lot more cynically, and there's, it's Yojimbo is on the whole a darker film. Which, in some ways, maybe it shouldn't be considered that, because Sanjuro is definitely the far more violent film.
Well, and that's what made it a really interesting proposition for me, is like, when I was watching it, I'm really kind of stuck about which one I actually prefer. Because this one is weirdly comical, with just the really, terrifyingly dark elements mixed in.
Yes.
And that makes it kind of enjoyable in a different way than Yojimbo. They're not really comparable. Because Yojimbo is more like just a slightly comedic dark story. Whereas Sanjuro is a strangely dark comedy.
This one's setting up a dichotomy of theme more than Yojimbo was interested in.
Yeah.
This one, this is showing, very much trying to show a conflict between, pacifism and the life he's chosen, but also, in doing that, keeps lighthearted moments and very, very dark moments.
This film, Yojimbo is a lot more overtly cynical about the things it is attempting to deconstruct, which makes the just shattering, it's a lot more cynical, despite the fact that in some ways Sanjuro is a lot more overt. Sanjuro openly has, take your pick for samurai, bumbling incompetent children, or incredibly cynical, dishonorable, sneaky, treacherous politicians.
Or option 3, mass murder.
Yeah, but in terms of, actual samurai,
right.
You either have bumbling incompetence, or you have, just, incredibly treacherous, politicians, essentially. Which is a lot more overtly, which is a lot more overt, fuck the samurai and fuck their common conception of being, the glory days. Which, a lot more overt in its attacking that mythos than Yojimbo was. But despite the fact that it's considerably more overt, is like you said, it is in some ways a comedy film, or a film that is considerably more lighthearted overtly on the whole than Yojimbo is, which is a lot more cynical and a darker film on the whole. Well, which makes which just makes the last 20 minutes of Sanjuro seem totally out of left field, and oh my god, what is going on?
Yeah, when did it get so dark? The weird thing is I kind of wonder, and I've got no basis for this other than my own mind, is if possibly Sanjuro in a little bit in a certain way is a response by Kurosawa to the way Yojimbo was received, because Yojimbo, even the people now who talk about it just talk about how great of a samurai film it is. And if his intentions are not to make necessarily a great samurai film, in that it's to kind of say, look, this is nonsense. This whole samurai mythos is crazy talk.
There wasn't a golden age, you guys.
Right.
They were still human.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing we go through with knights in shining armor in Western culture of what are you talking about? You're talking about murderers. And the thing about it is that I wonder if because people responded to Yojimbo being like, oh, that was an awesome samurai movie, samurai are awesome, if he felt that in Sanjuro he needed to like step his, kick it up to 11.
I also wonder if he was in some way
make
trying
the murders just murders.
Yeah, or in some ways he was trying to remind people by having, because there wasn't any official samurai in Yojimbo, and here there are samurai with a capital S, the actual the class, not just the guy with a katana. Right. Which is, he may have said, listen guys, I'm trying to make a point here, and then that's how he does it. You guys
didn't get it the first time.
By contrasting it with, no, you don't get it. Yojimbo is not technically a samurai. He is a...
Right.
Well, technically he is, but he is a vagabond, wanderer, not a clan, not a landed nobility class, etc. He has no, this... Showing him in contrast with all of these real samurai is, I think, sort of a lot more intentional, because there wasn't any, samurai in Yojimbo, whereas in Sanjuro, that's the whole point, is that all of the real samurai need this guy that they wouldn't give 2 seconds to under any other circumstances, because he's a wandering, poor vagrant, and yet he's the one that has to solve all their problems. So that there's even more samurai deconstruction going on in the fact that they are incapable of solving their own problems that are brought on by the fact that their class is a bunch of dirty, sneaking politicians.
Well, yes. And they also he creates a really interesting dichotomy within his own, this pair of movies, because you get to look at, if you watch them back to back like we did, or close enough to back, you end up with an interesting thing where you get to see that the samurai and the assholes with swords from the first film are almost indistinguishable from each other, except for how nicely they dress.
And how good their teeth are.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, in the end, he's creating this nice contrast of, guess what? Both of them are assholes with swords.
This is a running theme, I think.
One of them has better money.
Yeah, a lot of his work touches on this. The infamous ending of Seven Samurai, where the guy says, the only real benefiters here were the people, were the in the end, the bandits and us killing each other, whatever. The only real victors here are these people that will go back to hating samurai now that we're gone. Now that our use is up,
they don't go back to, in what we got into with Seven Samurais, they go back to hating samurai with pretty good reason.
Right. So they're
not wrong.
There's that. You see that, bandit or samurai, what difference does it make to the ordinary human when there's a guy who is extorting you at sword point into a life of servitude, which is, a part of the whole caste system deconstruction that's going on in these films to boot, is pointing out that this supposed golden era was really only golden if you were landed nobility, and otherwise was the most unbelievable...
less than 1% of the population.
Yeah, for everybody else was pretty much the most horrifying depravity imaginable. Which is kind of as an anecdote to that, when I saw Tom Cruise's The Last Samurai with my dad, which would have been our freshman year of college, after the movie ends, and I don't know, has either of you seen it?
A long time ago.
Okay.
I've seen parts
of it, the movie ends with the last bastion of samurai culture being wiped out by the Western influenced Meiji Restoration, and it's this big story of Japan losing itself to the West, which in many ways was true. Commodore Perry, kind of a dick. So you get that, and then after we got out, when we were walking out of the theater, my dad goes, it wasn't all bad, though, because it ended a, multi-thousand-year feudal caste system that ruthlessly oppressed pretty much everybody. It was the first step breaking the samurai caste system and instituting a more modern socioeconomic structure was the first step on a long road of women ceasing to be third-class citizens. It ended a lot of the horrible political immunity abuses of the samurai class. You couldn't just chop somebody's head off on the side of the road to test your sword like you used to. So there is some of that, I think, precursors to that in Kurosawa films of, you guys, this magical golden age that, you know, Japan culturally likes to retreat to as a form of nostalgia was unbelievably brutal and grimy and dirty and horrible.
And unfortunately, he didn't.
And full of
that point
morally destitute people and characters.
And the point never quite gets across.
Right.
I mean, in his films, he does a great job pointing it out. But like, if you talk to Japanese people, you will still get the
wistfulness.
That like glaze-eyed, like, oh, the samurai days kind of thing. And it's like, what are you talking about? I mean, you get it again. You get it with Western culture just as easily for different time periods of people going, oh, the good old days when people did blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, that was also the time when, like, women were basically slaves and black people couldn't vote or even,
literally counted as 3/5 of a person for census
purposes.
It's
like, what are you talking about?
It's the Glenn Beck. World. It is the Glenn Beck scenario of a constant pining for an America that never existed. A return,
and you get it here too in Japan too. It's
return to the 1950s. What a great social time that was for everybody who wasn't a white hetero male.
And you get the same thing here. Like, let's return to this golden age of, if you were not a landed, basically what amounts to landed gentry, you were trash, walking human trash.
So there's
and you were lucky to be trash because that meant you were at least a man.
Yes.
You had some bonuses there.
So I guess it's one of those weird things where, like, he makes a very powerful point, and I think he tries to make that point in Seven Samurai, but Seven Samurai is not as effective for me because it is god awful long.
Well, I think one of the things that makes it more effective
these movies make it is like so obvious and quick.
One of the things that makes it more effective here is that in Seven Samurai, in the other, he shows how bad the samurai are, but in this movie, like I said, the Chamberlain's wife actually represents a strong female character, and that's we don't get the other side ever.
Also, the film's sole voice of reason.
Guy, and the film's sole voice of reason.
Well, we've got another voice of reason. We got the man in the closet, who I love and adore. Yes. He is one of my favorite characters in any movie ever. The man who just steps out of the closet and is like Greek chorus style. He's like,
yes.
By the way, things you should be aware of are this, and this. I'm going back in the closet now. See you later.
Yes.
I love him.
He is my favorite
character, yes.
And he's also...
Him and the Chamberlain's wife are pretty much neck and neck for me on, like, just awesomeness.
Yes. They're both great. But like I said, and he's also a lower underling. He's the ugly people are good in this movie, which is, thematically different from a lot of other things and from a general human psychology. I mean, we're so ingrained with the idea that ugly is caused by sin that just like those guys, like
I'm standing by my reason that ugly people are bad.
Our silly protagonists at the beginning think that maybe he's the bad guy because he's ugly.
Because they even say, like, well, he looks the part or something like that. And it's like,
then exactly, which is
this not only critiques the idea that the olden days were so great, but it offers the alternative that we can be good in different ways. And I don't know if Seven Samurai really does that. I mean, it clearly establishes that these weren't exactly the best of times, but it doesn't necessarily offer the change. And this, 10 years later, offers a change.
Right. I would agree.
Seven Samurai, I think, in a lot of ways sets its ideological groundwork out a lot more bluntly. That is, people in Yojimbo and in Sanjuro are just froze again. So sometimes never mind, it came back. There's in some ways Kurosawa gets a little subtler about his critiques by this point in his film career, rather than Seven Samurai, where people the massacre, but But it's less the people aren't standing around opining. Oh, there's no. Yeah, there are not characters soliloquizing.
Blah blah blah.
The people telling us, the people telling us that this is bad aren't doing it by just saying, "Hey, this is bad." They're doing it by offering an alternative, I think.
Right, and then and you get that in Yojimbo too. Like you get that our meal guy at the beginning, basically our guy at the restaurant at the beginning of Yojimbo kind of does that for us and says this is, but in casual conversation rather than being like, "Hey Steve, guess what? Samurai suck."
Yeah,
and then they just go on to go back to plowing the field.
There are less peasantry opining at great length about the injustices, the manifest injustice of the caste system and the samurai class as a whole, which, in some ways is something of an anachronistic thing for them to be opining about in the rice paddies, but, maybe they were, who knows, but yeah, it definitely, you are meant to draw the criticism from the fact that all of these things are happening to begin with, that these characters exist to begin with. Then bluntly laying out, that this thing is even happening and how these people are responding to it. Then, just setting up characters who not only are in these situations but are opining openly to the audience about the manifest injustice of these situations and, how terrible it all is, which is, kind of how Seven Samurai winds up handling it, infamously in the final dialogue scene from wizened bald samurai to the other guy about how they haven't really won at all, and the only real victors are these fucking farming assholes over here who are going to go back to shitting on us in about 10 seconds, so we might as well get out of here. Which is sort of strange, because it's meant to be this... In some ways, you could interpret it as, the real wisdom of the samurai was when they actually fulfilled their role of upholding justice and stuff. But it's not really, that's not really his comment, is it? Or, that's not really what he means by saying the true victors are the little people. It is simultaneously could be read as, the one guy that fulfills the samurai code realizes you shouldn't be doing this. You do this for the nobility of doing it, not for yourself, not for your own glory or pay. But simultaneously is, him opining on the futility of everything they do. That they don't, even when they do the right thing, there is no benefit to it. They don't gain anything from it. They will go back to being hated even when they do something right.
Yeah. But because they're so bad in general, I mean...
Right, which is that, they are not...
Well, yeah,
unjustly do the peasants...
Then they can also be read as the only time we're worth a darn is when we're killing each other.
Yeah.
Any other time, we're just a waste of flesh and space. And
somewhat less enthusiastic about the samurai period than the Yojimbo movies, which sort of critique it by having fun with it, because everyone in there is such a everybody except the main character is such a comically inept boob that we are to draw the criticism by the fact that it's a world staffed in inept, treacherous boobs, rather than.
Well, that's my preferred critique methodology, and I that's what I think really struck me about both of these movies was it was just it's so much fun to watch a critique, which is basically watch these idiots.
Everybody is dumb.
Yeah, check out how dumb these guys are.
All the samurai are morons. Even the guys that are politicking and sneaky really and treacherous can't do that right. Otherwise they wouldn't have just blindly trusted this murderer for hire.
Yeah, even our nemesis character in this one, just instantly trusts Sanjuro, and it's a little bit weird. It's why are you so dumb that you're just going to trust this guy you met yesterday?
Yeah,
apparently you are.
The answer is,
but it helps the plot.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Well, I mean, but it just makes us read him as dumber than we did before, and it's fine because he's already supposed to be dumb. He's the cleverest among them, and he is still an idiot.
Right. There's definitely an issue with the fact that part of how Yojimbo succeeds at all of this is largely due to the manifest incompetence of the people who trust him at all, which is everyone.
Sanjuro is kind of weirdly, in his own way in this film, the classic recent action movie bad guy, in that like he creates this plot, this plan that kind of hinges on everybody else being so dumb that they'll believe it.
Yes.
Which they promptly do.
Right, which I guess is part of our manifest critique of the samurai culture, is look how dumb these guys are.
Yeah.
And the only guy that sees through it in Yojimbo is the gun-wielding Nemesis character. That's kind of that's another reason he is established as the only credible threat, because he's the only one who isn't monumentally stupid and gullible.
And that's the weird thing, is in Sanjuro, we don't get that character. We don't really have...
No, it's the guy in the closet.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Done. I agree. Guy in the closet is the only one who sees truth and reality.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one who realizes that the plan is dumb because there's no second story on the gate at the temple.
Right, and that like 9 guys who have lived in this area their entire lives.
Oh, not just 9. The entire enemy.
Well, I know, but he's commenting on them specifically.
Yeah.
When then we find out that the entire bad guy, for lack of a better term, army is also equally dumb, and it takes them 15, 20 minutes, half an hour to realize
to figure
out that there's no second story.
Only after half of them have been butchered do they realize that perhaps things are not as they seem here. Which is, it again sort of gives the character in Yojimbo, the other bodyguard, gives him a little extra punch. It's because he's only a hair's difference from Yojimbo, morally or psychologically, whatever you say. That's why he sees right through.
Right, he's like,
why he knows exactly he knows exactly what he's up to. He knows what he's doing because he is Yojimbo, just taken to the logical extension of that, of his psychology,
morality.
Yeah, right. The Nemesis in this one isn't necessarily an equal. I mean, swordplay wise,
no,
they're on board with each other, but he doesn't.
He's not another bodyguard. Yeah. He's not another wandering killer.
Yeah. That makes him incapable of seeing that wandering killer.
Right-ness,
because he even says things like, I can't recommend you because of this mistake and things.
Right. He's not the dark. His nemesis in here is somewhat less interesting because he is not the dark mirror of Yojimbo himself. Yeah. He is not the the abyss gazing back, as it were, of Yojimbo, so much as just, another guy in the employ of this clan who's a nemesis to Yojimbo by virtue of the fact that he has some degree of intelligence and certainly a great degree of sword skill, but that's really where his threat assessment ends.
It's really interesting because Sanjuro makes a really weird, not weird, but interesting comment about why he got tied up. He's like, I'm not honor bound to die like these guys.
Idiots.
Yeah, basically, very derogatory feeling to it. And then the other guy, the clan member, the schemer, the nemesis says I can't recommend you after this, and it's like you miss the fact that that was a dig. You're an idiot too. He's saying
right. You missed the fact that he's commenting on the stupidity of
the
their
fact
lifestyle
that you're going to die for these people. Is stupid.
Who are kind of shitty people, not worth dying for. It's again, the Sanjuro is in many respects kind of a weird film in that it is simultaneously overtly considerably lighter in tone, despite numerous aspects of it being considerably darker and more horrifying and more graphic than Yojimbo ever dared to get into. As well as being in many ways more overt about its social criticism, just by virtue of the cast of characters and who they are, what their roles are in the society, as opposed to just two incompetent gangs. that are, at each other's throats. This is, there isn't necessarily an overt criticism of samurai as a whole in Yojimbo, whereas in Sanjuro it is, it is a double-sided critique of the samurai in that you either you were an incompetent ninny or you are a, dishonorable, treacherous, villainous person. Yeah, equal parts ninny, but either you're either a virtuous ninny or incredibly treacherous and deceitful, but also incompetent still.
Yeah, so
the only competent guy is this morally bankrupt psychopath.
Yeah. So on a light, a kind of unrelated note, my son loves these movies. My 3-year-old son loves these movies.
Well, good.
I thought you had a daughter.
No,
I have a son.
He has a son.
Well.
And
right.
I was watching them at the computer.
So congrats, Pat. You're my dad. Go ahead and
No.
I
did nothing. I'm watching them on my computer, and he's watching his Thomas the Tank Engine. He looks over and he's like, "What are you watching, Dad?" I'm like, "I'm just watching this. I gotta watch this." And he's like, and then he comes over, climbs in my lap, and then proceeds to watch a half an hour of Yojimbo. And then, another half an hour of, Sanjuro. He just, I guess, likes I don't know what he likes about it, honestly.
The biting social critique about the samurai mythos, right? Obviously, is what every kid can get on board with that.
Yeah. Well, because it's not even like he's watching parts where there was swordplay. I think it's just that, he likes the way everybody's kind of yelling at everybody else all the time.
He is a huge sucker for extremely disconcerting sex.
Yeah, that's actually that might be part of it. He's like,
just can't get enough of
great. Yeah, this is the best music I've ever heard. Can we get the soundtrack in the car?
Well, I think that's given his experience with Thomas the Tank Engine, I think that might be true.
That's kind of we'll talk about this after the podcast. But are you doing that because this is your conception of what you give to a child because you're American, or is Thomas the Tank Engine big in Japan?
Thomas the Tank Engine is big in Japan, but Thomas the Tank Engine is from England anyway.
It's true.
Well, so I don't even know where to begin then.
It's all very confusing. Yeah, this movie also awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, they are great.
They're a great
I
pair,
feel like the optimal way to watch these is, yes, there's
basically.
a reason Criterion sells them together, and I don't think it's just because they are involving the same character.
They are a pair.
In some context, not so much sequels as, they are literal companion
Yeah, it's
films.
watch this and then watch this, and then tell me what you think when you're done watching them both.
So, it's a very bizarre...
I love them though. This is this fits into the category of all the films that me and Adam have watched for this. This one fits into the category of, if I saw this, I would probably buy this.
Do you think it was ever the I don't think Kurosawa made any other sequels, actual sequels. Not that this is a actual sequel, but this is the closest
to a continuation of a story. Yeah, I would say so, because usually they're one-off. It's that 2 hours is a 2-hour story, and that's it.
His films
Although
are usually
a sequel to High and Low would be awesome.
Low and High.
Yeah, exactly. It would be so easy to set up the title.
What would it cover, Pat?
Higher and Lower.
What's your ideal plot for the sequel?
Another hapless household servant has a child abducted, and then when he gets the phone call, Toshiro Mifune mugs for the camera and goes, "Here we go again."
It's exactly the same thing. We are talking Die Hard 1, Die Hard 2 sort of situation. It's summer again, and there's another guy jealous of his air conditioner, and then it all goes to hell from there.
That reminds me, Pat. It must be positively murderous over there.
You mean?
Because it's in terms of summer.
It is when it is summer. It's not yet.
It's not yet summer over there because it's already 86 degrees and humid over here.
It's all relative, man. If in a place where it gets above 100 for the entire summer, we're not yet to summer. We're in pre-summer.
That sounds horrifying. 100 degrees plus all the time. No wonder those peasants said this.
Yeah, right.
It's okay. It's metric.
It's over 100 and you guys get swords? Wait, what?
Yeah.
I'm sweating and
rice
you get
patties,
to cut me?
this is the worst plan for a society. Anyway,
hopefully Pat survives the summer.
So that's
we've got more movies to talk about.
It's always a gamble. I'm a gambler.
So these are films I feel we will come back to in many respects when we get to other parts of the Criterion collection. There are a couple in particular that, hold on a second, I will pull them out.
Are you literally getting DVDs off
your
DVD shelves?
He's literally pulling them out.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. He's like, okay, so we've got here.
So there is a whole section, a whole Criterion collection pack that I got back in college
called the Samurai Pack.
It's actually a Rebel Samurai pack. Ooh, so it is
so specific.
It is a since they already kind of blew the game on these two movies in terms of that subject matter, because those were already in a 4-part Kurosawa collection, which was these two last 7 Samurai and
they don't mix up the collections.
Fortress.
You don't get any from one of the collections in another collection.
No. The Kurosawa collection was these two 7 Samurai and the Hidden Fortress. They eventually released a just double pack of these two films. This was Samurai Rebellion, which was also a Mifune film. Sword of the Beast, which stars our Nemesis character in both of these films as the main character, and then 2 other films, one of which is just called Kill, and another one called Samurai Spy, which is another, which is kind of a ninja themed deconstruction of the time period. All of which are a Criterion boxed collection because they are of a psychological vein with these films in terms of their but attacking and deconstructing the mythos.
What spine number those are. So we might talk about them in 20 years.
There is also Sword of Doom, which is the one I mentioned earlier, which also has the Nemesis character. Also has starring Toshiro Mifune in Sword of Doom, although not as the main character. So that's this Sword of Doom is 280. So yeah, that could be a minute.
That might be a little long.
And the rest of these, that 4-pack I mentioned, are all admittedly back to back. So that's going to be a hell of a weekend with me. 310, 311, 312, and 313.
Well, I assume we'll have you on sometime before 280.
Right. One thinks. But those are, that is another, when, in 50 years when we get to those, we will come back to these films because they are...
And we probably will have forgotten them because I'll be senile.
Right. So
we'll see.
Maybe
it'll be like a whole new experience. We'll be like, man, these guys invented this archetype. Like, oh, wait, no.
But the point being that it kicked off a period of these sort of grittier takes on the popular conception, which, again, was the 60s. I know this is going to blow your guys' mind. The 60s were something of a counterculture in many countries.
No,
I know.
Talking about.
In Japan, taking the form of a pushback against the post-war idolization / Glenn Beckian, desperate nostalgia for a time period, for a extremely whitewashed version of a country's perceived golden age. Which is ironic that Glenn Beck pines for the American post-war golden age, and Japan, dipped back a couple hundred years.
Pines for
feudalism.
300 years ago, 400 years ago.
So, there is a common thread, as it were, in that respect. So we will obviously touch on that later, but that's kind of those are some other films one can name off the bat, which were spiritual companions to this in terms of their overall critique of this supposed era and the persons who inhabit it, which was a thing a lot of Japanese period filmmakers in the 60s went to town on, essentially. So, but I think in many ways Yojimbo is always the both the classic example as well as the most well-known. Certainly the one that's made the most, has influenced everything else as much as it has culturally.
Yes.
And it's in some ways, I think, sad that Sanjuro never kind of gets its full due. It is, again, despite the fact that I don't think you can buy one without Sanjuro. But that is never... People who, are not Japanese, 60s cinema lovers, you can still find some that have seen or at least understand what Yojimbo is, but almost nobody has, at least in my experience, has actually seen Sanjuro.
Yeah, I don't know. When I mention these films to people, they do recognize the name, but it's almost always just like, oh yeah, I know Yojimbo, but like Sanjuro, I haven't gotten much recognition out of people, but
it kind of got cultural short shrift, which again is sort of bizarre historically speaking, considering that Yojimbo was nakedly aped by Western cinema, so you'd think that the sequel would have gotten something, although again the lawsuit may have stymied people's desire to do that somewhat in terms of whether or not it was worth the risk.
But yeah, I think I will consider buying these, and people will hopefully consider actually watching these ones.
Adam, do you have any bizarre cinema-going historical anecdotes about Sanjuro?
Since it kind of fell by the wayside after the lawsuit over. Like I said, though, I really feel like this would have worked as a Western too.
Obviously that's where I felt like this movie, one of the reasons it didn't get as much is because I think that
it's a little more steep.
The critiques that it's offering, it's more localized.
Oil Baron in place of Chamberlain and Magistrate or whatever it was, and you can still make it work.
There's corrupt politicians everywhere.
Yeah, it's like oil magnate or.
But that's the thing, is oil magnates aren't renowned and mythically glorified for their nobility and honor.
That's true, but
that's where I think
you would lose
falls.
some of the critique. But the thing is Yojimbo is, like, the remakes of Yojimbo lose a lot of the critique elements anyway. Like, they're mostly focusing on the
glorifications.
Story. And so...
Yeah, they are...
Or not the story, but, the story of this character, right?
They are glorifications of the archetype.
Right, and so, like,
miss the point that the archetype exists... as a critique.
You could easily do that with Sanjuro as well, but I guess you've already done that because you made Yojimbo remakes already.
Yeah, I just think that the way more than Yojimbo was, or what Yojimbo accomplished sort of cynically and incidentally, Sanjuro comes right out and says, which is, these guys are all, either corrupt or dummies or both. And the only one that's had his head on straight is this more extremely morally dubious character over here. So in that respect, yeah, I think it strikes me as being conceivably much harder to make a Sanjuro film that sort of carries the same punch in the West, since it is much more, I think, the substance of that film is, I think, more localized in terms of what it's intended to do and what its characters are intended to be perceived as. There's no analogous class of person widely lionized in American society for being X, but who were secretly Y. We kind of already knew that oil barons are uniquely treacherous, deceitful, corrupt people. We already knew that gangsters in the Prohibition era were bloodthirsty psychopaths. We have a certain degree of more honesty about that time frame. To some extent, I think you could probably say that in the same way that this critiques that rose-tinted glasses, in some ways America has sort of gotten on that train, albeit very belatedly, with stuff like Mad Men or...
I suppose you could use...
Mad Men is intended to sort of be that deconstruction of the 50s and 60s glorified American post-war period, which is that, it was actually pretty awful, unless you were a rich white dude. which is admittedly the story of America, a cultural critique. It sucks if you aren't a rich white guy, but it in particular how that's the closest I can kind of come to attacking a time period widely perceived to be X.
Well, I mean, it could be done. Something like this could be done via or through American founding fathers kind of thing, but that would be a that would also probably get you burned at the stake. So,
right, America also has, especially nowadays, culturally, has no tolerance for daring to look at its founding figures with any kind of historical contextual honesty whatsoever. And that is political suicide to suggest that the fact that these guys own slaves may make them kind of shitty.
Hooray!
Yeah, and this is why no one will listen to our podcast up to today. Like, oh my god!
So American cultural cowardice.
So what we really need to do is start appealing
forbids us,
to a
preempts us from
audience,
making good films.
So the rest of this podcast will be done in French and German and Spanish.
Right. I'm trying to think of, can you think of anything, either of you offhand, that is the Western or American equivalent in terms of time period and class of people
I already did. It's called
deconstruction.
Well, I mean, we don't do it, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's just it. I can't think of something because I don't...
There's been enough. I mean, there's Roots goes back to that, and
I suppose, yeah.
You know, I'm a little less mainstream with the histories of Howard Zinn and Chomsky. Obviously, get into that sort of thing too.
But I don't think you would...
I wouldn't call those pop cultural at all.
No, I was going to say, given that those guys can't, mainstream network news won't even have them on to opine on various issues because they don't want to hear, naked critique of U.S. policy. I don't think you can... Whereas these, Yojimbo, obviously...
Well, but then we get into this thing that, like we talked about before, is if everybody fails to read your cultural critique as cultural critique, then you've both succeeded and failed. Yeah, you got it popular, but then everybody missed your message.
Everybody missed,
which I think happens with Mad Men a lot.
Yeah, there's some other. There have been other films and TV shows and stuff that have done that, where they become stupidly popular, and everybody fails to recognize that, hey, this is supposed to be stupid, not good.
Even Mad Men is often critiqued for glossing over the racial issues, the gender. It toys around with the gender issues, but has done a lot less of that in recent seasons. It's often criticized for glossing over race and economic issues, and it's also, it has perversely, in some ways, amplified the cultural longing to return to, quote, a time when men were men, end quote, which really means a time when rich white men
did whatever the hell they wanted.
The only thing, did whatever the hell they wanted, and were the only thing anyone was ever allowed to aspire to. Was a rich white being a rich white professional male. So in some ways it has lionized that, which is doubly troubling since that, Don Draper is a stone cold sociopath. And instead has become lionized as the quintessential male that everyone wants. Guys want to be him, women want to be with him, which is horrifying because that show, to its credit, never flinches from showing him as a stone-cold sociopath who, which is probably the closest.
But yeah, it's the same.
You get to it.
In Yojimbo and people who love it is a lot of like, what an awesome samurai movie this is. This is not an awesome samurai movie. This is a critique of how horrible samurai were and them being a non-existent entity at this point, except for guys who wander around Japan pretending that they are samurai, like modern day samurai. Like, oh, I'm not going to show emotion. I'm going to be stone cold and.
That happens.
Yeah,
it's quite common.
So glad.
Guys who see themselves as samurai, kind of like modern extensions of samurai, they walk around kind of being douchebags and not smiling. That's like, Enjoy your life.
I think learning that that's true is a good place for us to stop.
Yeah, I think so too.
Thank you once again, Donovan, for joining us. Thank you once again, listeners, for
It's my pleasure,
listening.
as always.
So what's coming up next, Adam?
Oh, coming up next, we have a big change of pace, actually, for us. Next is our first documentary. 1989, Woo! Al Reinhardt, rather.
So we're not counting Nanook of the North as a documentary?
No. That clearly doesn't count as a documentary.
Okay.
This is For All Mankind. Reinhardt's piecing together of various material produced by the astronauts who went to the moon, about the astronauts who went to the moon. So, it'll be pretty.
Well, this is going to be a problem. It's all been faked.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm sure we'll be able to point out where the sound stages are and right. etc.
Weird shadows. Wind that shouldn't exist.
Yes. But we'll talk about all that next week. Thank you once again for listening. Donovan Hill, thank you once again for joining us. Goodbye, everyone.
My pleasure.
See you next time.
You've been listening to Lost in Criterion, a production of With Two Brains. The show is hosted by Adam Glass and John Patrick Owatari Dorgan. Jonathan Hape did the music, and Adam Glass also edited it all together. Feel free to contact us by email via lostincriterion@withtwobrains.com, or join us on the